this is a problem of the police and not of the people getting frisked, searched, killed. And the minute I wrote that down, had a flash of empathy. And it was not for the state of being Black, because I will never know what that is like. It was for the experience of not being believed.
That is Kelsey Crowe, the guest for today's episode. In today's episode, you'll hear Kelsey share her recollections of the moment when she empathized with the Black community. She'll also share her past skepticisms, which had made it difficult for her to empathize. Not an easy topic to discuss in today's political climate. Join me in holding space for Kelsey to reflect honestly. Welcome to the journey of realizing empathy. I think we all have experienced a moment in our lives when we suddenly empathize with somebody we previously did not, by experiencing a moment of realization. One where we went, aha, oh, or maybe even burst out with laughter concerning something we either did not or had incorrectly assumed to understand and appreciate enough. While these realizations can sometimes be had in a few minutes, it can also take years. In fact, it may never happen. It is a seemingly simple yet complex and lifelong process of realizing empathy that I wish to explore in all of our episodes. Hey there, listener. My name is Slim. I help startup founders in their maturation as a leader and a CEO by helping them confront themselves in a true mirror. And I believe few things serve as a truer mirror than the challenges we face in our interactions with other people. The Journey of Realizing Empathy is a show where we explore how our challenges with other people can ultimately serve as a true mirror that helps us mature as leaders and human beings. In each of our episodes, we host a guest who tells a story of a time in their life when they struggled to empathize with one or more people until a series of realizations moved them to empathize with those very people. Welcome, Kelsey.
Oh, thank you. It's so nice to be here, Slim. I really appreciate and I appreciate the premise of your show, truly.
Thank you. Would you be willing to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Kelsey Crowe. I will be talking a lot more about how I came upon this path, studying and writing about empathy. I wrote a book with Emily McDowell, who's this wonderful greeting card maker and illustrator, and a book called There's No Good Card for This, What to Do and Say When Life is Scary, Awful, and Unfair to the People we love. And in that book, I talk about empathy and compassion, but also mix that with a lot of practical how-tos that I borrow from the field of communication studies primarily. And I do a lot of workshops on empathy. I used to do those in person. They're being evaluated now by a few universities who are looking at the work's impact on empathy and prosocial behavior. And I am now, as so many of us are, figuring out how to put this work online and give it greater access. And I have found that to be a really exciting challenge. And I now, with that, have started a company called Empathy Bootcamp. And I'm working with academics and trainers to expand my initial premise of empathy, which was solely around empathy in times of suffering, to more questions around how we can apply empathy. And that's me.
Thank you so much. Well, before we begin, I want to once again acknowledge and appreciate how much it means to me for you to be on the show. Because as I briefly mentioned before the show, when I reach out to people, not everyone is willing to talk about struggles publicly. And personally, that's where I began, by sharing my own struggles. And I think in the current time, it's really difficult. There's a lot of tension in the air, so to speak. And to be able to talk freely about our own struggles, I believe, is also something that can help others in an immense way. So I really appreciate your willingness to come on the show. Thank you.
Sure. I really appreciated you asking. Yeah.
Thank you. So would you be willing to briefly talk about who or the group of people with whom you had difficulty empathizing at some point? until you were finally empathized with them?
Sure. Okay, so I was working on my book in 2014, and at that time, not looking at all to talk about empathy or compassion, and really interested in just a do's and don'ts guide, Emily Post guide to suffering. So just tell me where to put the knife and the fork, and I'm good. So just tell me what to say, and I'm good. My background is actually in public policy. My dissertation was in politics and power. I was working in government for a long time and doing this book on the side, thinking that could be so easy, and it's not, to help others like myself who struggled with reaching out to people in their time of need. And for personal reasons, that was very important to me. However, I thought I just needed a policy manual, if you will.
Like a to-do guide.
Because that's what I was used to writing. I attended an incredible talk by a fellow named Dr. Charles Garfield, who founded this Shanti Project. And he just had a far more expansive view of empathy in times of suffering. He trains volunteers to be with the sick and dying.
When you say expansive, how does it compare to a less expansive version?
The line that he has that I asked him if I could use in the book and that I attribute to him, I'm holding the Korean version of the book, is your kindness is your credential. And people are always looking for the fix-its. What do I say? What do I do? But I'm telling you, people in pain will run from the fixers. It is not your fixing. It is your kindness that is your credential. And that, I was like, yes, I was looking for fix-its. Like I am looking for fix-its. So,
aren't we all?
Aren't we all? So it dawned on me that there was a lot. He just brought me there with that line to a much deeper place. So I decided to read this book, a book on empathy, to just understand more of what I was missing. And I was like, okay, I get it. But nonetheless, it seemed a quality for somebody who ventures on a mountaintop or who...
Wait, what do you mean? Like
a monk or a Jesuit priest, or whatever. And
people who have a lot of time in their hands. And
yes. And even probably, and I have it on my website, I talk about the myths about empathy, and those come from me. That empathy makes you weak, that empathy makes you a sucker, that it's all about the other person. And that's a very subservient place.
Wow, let's pause there for a second. It's all about the other person. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Thinking that it was all about helping others to a kind of pathological degree, that it can be a very ironically needy condition if you feel you always have to help somebody else. There's people who give to get, and you can feel their giving is to get something. They want to get affirmation. They want to get, affirmation of some kind. And it can be pretty icky. So anyway, had all these horrible thoughts about empathy. I was reading the book, and then I surprised myself with a moment of empathy. I recognized it as empathy. To your question, like, what was that point? Michael Brown in 2014 in Ferguson, he was killed by the police, and Twitter exploded with white privilege hashtags. I grew up a white kid in what's no longer called inner city, like very poor neighborhood, which in urban environments tends to be people of color, Puerto Rican, Black. And so when you grow up like I did, you don't see yourself as privileged per se. And I wasn't along many dimensions. And also I figured I can't be that racist. This is my community. These are my people. So getting a little indignant about the white privilege hashtag. And when I feel a sense of indignance, I usually try to write something down to figure out what's activated in me. So I was writing things down, and I was writing what was initially skepticism about white privilege. And I said, well, how do we know this kid didn't do something to deserve it, right? A very common response. How do we know that this is a problem of the police and not of the people getting frisked, searched, killed? And the minute I wrote that down, I had a flash of empathy. And it was not for the state of being Black, because I will never know what that is like. It was for the experience of not being believed. Being on the receiving end of somebody's skepticism. And I knew that experience very well because I had shortly before had breast cancer. And when you have cancer, as you fear people's judgment of you, that you did something to deserve this. Even in the case of illness, all of a sudden, out of the woodwork, your friends are asking about your spiritual practice, about your diet.
You didn't meditate enough. You didn't eat well.
I didn't meditate enough because you didn't believe in empathy. This is why this happened to you.
Of course.
I was stunned. And also having it minimized as though it were just a fluke. Oh, breast cancer is nothing these days. And
did you really hear that?
Oh, for sure. Thank God it was breast cancer. And it was very upsetting. And I felt afraid of what people would think of me. And my chemo head, walking, just feeling very conspicuous, not knowing how people were seeing. I just started seeing all of these parallels. Now, that doesn't mean I know what it's like to be Black, but my empathy was more about feeling questioned for what has happened to me and for what I look like, and people not seeing past that or just seeing that as part of their filter of me. And I was like, oh my God, this is empathy. This is it. This is the thing that I was avoiding for so long. And I realized this is super important. And it's interesting, particularly related to this notion of race, because there's this incredibly interesting scholar out of Florida State University, Alicia Gaines. She's a literature professor who studies basically the limits of empathic understanding that whites can have of Blacks if they try to write from the perspective of someone who's Black, or if they try to do role plays on a plantation. It's just not going to cut it. Empathy doesn't cut it. And I would say it doesn't cut it if you actually think that you, Slim, know what it's like to be a woman. But if there is something, a condition that has made you feel a little bit invisible or paranoid about being invisible, and tapping into that, or the experience of not being believed for something that you describe that you see in many places, not necessarily empathizing with me as a woman, but empathizing as somebody who's trying to get my experience understood. Anyway, so very long answer, but it was super profound for me.
I mean, I really want to kind of jog back a little bit. So you were talking about how you were avoiding talking about empathy. Can you talk a little bit more of what made you feel a little bit resistant to talking about empathy prior to that realization you had?
I guess I was, I'm a New Yorker.
What does that mean?
New Yorkers are very literal. In New York, you hear this expression two-faced a lot. If somebody doesn't say what they mean, or they hold back, and then you learn they said something somewhere else, you call them two-faced. And there's a lot of people that you describe as two-faced.
Right.
I don't hear that expression out here in California. I think instead people are more judicious.
So now, how does that make it more difficult to talk about empathy?
I haven't done like a huge psychological workup around this, but with some of the personality testing that I've done, I relate to people who are fairly literal and don't do well with ambiguity. And empathy really requires humility. That there is more than my experience here that makes up this situation. And the value of humility, as opposed to the theft of humility, that humility takes something from you, but that humility actually gives you more.
What does it take away from you, humility?
Potentially, I think people see humility as being pushed around.
Yes. You're losing face, right?
Yeah, losing face. Yes. Yeah. Humility is
humiliated.
Humiliation.
That's interesting, those two words.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Clearly there's some integration there. Yeah, there's an article in that for sure.
Kelsey's writing something new now. But that is so precious what you just said. The first time you mentioned the word literal, I don't think I really understood and appreciated what you meant by it. But what I'm starting to understand is literalness is related to directness, is saying what you mean. That's an important aspect of being literal. And saying what you mean also accompanies the desire not to be two-faced. Nobody wants to be two-faced. We want to be who we are. We want to be true to ourselves with the best intentions, saying things that are direct and literal,
Yes.
with no malicious intention whatsoever.
Right.
At the same time, I think what you're also saying is, from the other person's perspective, what you consider literal and something that you have the best intention to do, to not be two-faced, can actually not be the most appropriate or effective thing to say or do at that particular moment in time in that relationship. And at the heart of that is you being humble enough to proactively assume that there may be something I don't know.
Right.
Not only that,
God forbid.
right. Maybe
Yeah.
there is something I don't know. And not only that, but also saying, in fact, there is value in me not knowing, because
Yes.
the moment I step into this ambiguous space, I may be able to learn something new.
Yes.
And without that openness, it's really difficult for one to enter into this space where things like empathy sits up. Am I understanding you?
Correct. Yeah.
So if we were to go back to that moment where you had breast cancer, what are some things that happened?
So someone who I don't know very well, through my husband's meditation group, he's meditated for 30 years, left me a book from Louise Hay, How You Can Heal Your Life.
Wait, I just want to concretely understand. So through your husband, so you don't personally know this person very well.
I met her at gatherings.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Came to your house on a random day, knocked on your door, and left a book on your doorstep. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Keep going.
Which could be really nice.
I'm sure there was great intentions behind, right?
Someone did that because I was going through chemo. I needed that. But so her book talks about how our mindset causes illness or causes accidents, things like that. And in some cosmic way, I imagine that is true. And there's research to back up any proposition. And there is research that, and I'm glad there is, that investigates the relationship between stress and cancer. But I was like, what's the youngest person to get cancer? Did that baby bring it upon themselves? Did Neanderthals, there's evidence in fossils that they had cancer. What?
How much damage must we do to our body with thoughts and nutrition before we succumb to this thing called cancer? It's basically
Yeah. Another one, a friend of mine's mother ran into me on the street. I was wearing my hat and she said, "Oh, I heard what happened." And I said, "Thank you." And she said, "Thank God it's not really a thing anymore." And I was in rough shape and I was anyway, lots of examples like that. But as many examples as that exist, I could multiply by 20 the number of beautiful, positive examples. This other woman who lost her father, she said, it's as if you've been swimming underwater the whole time and something really awful happens to you and you come up and you see this whole other universe of activity and connection and vibrancy and ecosystem, which is the caring community. All of a sudden you see this world where people reach out and help somebody who's lost somebody or who has cancer or who's tapped in. But some of us can live for a long time not being tapped in to the fact that this other world exists where people really support each other a lot.
In some sense, there's sort of two sides to the coin. On the one side, you're talking about the hurt that you experienced from people who had the best of intentions. On the other hand, you were able to see a group of people that you may have never met otherwise. Is that true?
Yeah, and there's a lot of incredible, beautiful people out there. And truthfully, that's sometimes what's hardest for me about doing these podcasts or writing pieces is there are people with just so much wisdom in this space who are such stewards in their community and they're just doing their thing. And people aren't asking them about it, but they are incredible. Yeah.
When you say that's what makes it hard by writing pieces, how does it relate? What makes it hard?
This topic of empathy or kindness.
Yeah.
Unless you're the academic who's studying empathy from the perspective of psychometric assessments and validating theories and really being a scientist about it, are you truly an expert? Like, what does that mean? And people invite people like myself who are dubbed experts. And yet, in truth, there are such incredible practitioners of empathy that live all around us who are such models.
Oh, I see. So in some ways, you're extending the value of humility that you talked about earlier, not merely in relation to people that we have sometimes difficulty empathizing, but also in a society where, you know, when we become a little bit more public, let's say, and we have work that kind of becomes accessible to others, there is a sense of responsibility that we don, where we want to make sure that what we're putting out there is actually true, useful and valuable and all those things. At the same time, the way others label us in order, for them to probably legitimize, why you should listen to this person, labels like experts or scholar or adjectives have to be put in front of your name. But that sort of then comes back to haunt us a little bit, because you realize and admit, I've had some experiences and it's really made it important for me to talk about this. And that's why I'm doing the work I do. But at the same time, I'm not by any stretch of imagination claiming that I'm like the world's expert who knows everything. And
just ask my family.
Right. Because I think what you're getting at
One time, my daughter, she said, and they call you the empathy girl?
Can we dwell on this for a little longer? Do you mind?
Sure.
As I'm asking people to come on this interview, one of the things that I'm noticing is this sort of inner conflict, let's say, of recognizing how important this topic is to them on a very personal level and wanting to put in the energy and the effort into the work. At the same time, when their work goes public, I think there is the potential for some kind of backlash. Does that resonate?
Yeah, I guess it does resonate. I straddle this world of practice in academia. I got a PhD. It wasn't in psychology and empathy studies, but I know enough to read an article. And I've conducted research at Berkeley on empathy, on families with political differences, submitted articles, have some in peer-reviewed journals, things like that. But ultimately, for me, my dedication is to make this super practical and fun to look at and entertaining. And in that regard, I'm a practitioner. And you have a lot of practitioners who can take the work of the scientists and mainstream it, which I think is fantastic. But we aren't always the best models of it, And I do feel there's a lot of elevation. I mean, this is not happening to me, but there is a lot of elevation of people in the business role, valuing them for their empathy, just like we're elevating celebrities for their virtuousness or for their activism. And it's just, I think, a confusing space to understand who do we trust and who do we two-faced.
Right.
Oh my God.
So the New Yorker in you is still alive. But I love this. I just genuinely love this. So here's what I'm hearing, and you tell me if I'm on crack or I'm actually listening to what you're talking about. In my mind, empathy has this loop inside it, which the moment you say you're empathic, there is this danger of losing that humility part. Right? But the way in which a lot of the platforms are designed or set up these days, where we put certain people on a pedestal and we put labels like experts or some kind of virtuous labeling on it, that does make it difficult for them because everybody else has certain levels of expectations. Sorry, go ahead.
I said, I realized too, I mean, obviously some of this is why it's dovetailing into the therapy session, but it's the notion of imposter syndrome, right? Who am I to talk about this? And I went to this workshop for women to learn how to write op-eds based on the premise that this was in the late, maybe like 2010 or 12 or something. 83% of op-eds published were by men.
Huh.
Yes. And so there was a drive to change that by changing the
Sure.
ratio of submissions, which were also very low by women.
So it's not just a matter of being accepted, even if
Yeah,
submission is low.
yeah, it's also women are not submitting. And so this training was targeted towards women, and women were asked to, as the first exercise in the day, and these were women who were communication experts and EDs and journalists who could write about other people, but just not like an op-ed. So anyway,
Wait, I'm sorry. I'm a little bit ignorant about the difference between op-ed and like journal articles. What's the difference?
where you're writing like an opinion piece where you're saying, I think.
Or without backing it up with
Versus
like
what-
scientific evidence?
You can sprinkle some in there, but you're really putting your opinion out there versus a journalistic piece that's describing an event or covering a person, or, I mean, obviously they're bringing their artistry to it, but they don't necessarily bring their opinion,
Got it.
to
So
it.
they have
They're
to
not supposed to.
stand behind their opinion more so in the op-ed than like an article.
Yes, yeah.
Got it.
But she opens up the exercise asking you to fill in the blank of this sentence. And the sentence is, I am an expert in blank because blank. And the women these accomplished women could not say they were an expert in anything. And I'm telling you, no offense to men at all, but they would not have trouble filling that in to the same degree. This room, 30 women, no one wanted to fill in that sentence.
Zero.
Wow. There was one male observer in the room, and he said, it's easy. Like he was trying to, come on, wake up. So anyway, so I think that's just more about, life than necessarily empathy.
Once again, I'm hearing this, you're not saying this explicitly, but I'm hearing it. It's really hard to tease out life from empathy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, you shouldn't.
How would that work, right? Which is probably why this topic is both fascinating and very difficult, complex, and ambiguous at the same time. And in my mind, probably why we're wrestling with this, such a hot topic, because there is no easy answer, right?
But at the same time, I do try to make it easy.
How do you make it easy?
By my book, like I have an empathy menu. These are a list of things you can do. You choose 3, and then you choose things you don't want to do. And you try to make it very easy for yourself to reach out to somebody else. And I really relate to people who are not comfortable in deep conversations. They aren't the one that's going to want to talk about it. Right. And so what avenue exists for that person? If we only describe empathy as a phenomenon of listening and conversation, I think that leaves out a lot of possibility for incredible gestures that somebody can easily do for somebody without the same fear and hesitation. So I really believe in making our connection to others tailored for who you are and where you are in your life. If you're super busy, if you're super maxed, if you're depressed, what can you do? And I do that both around the gestures that we do for others, as well as in how we communicate, and just certain little tips and tricks that can help people demonstrate sometimes the humility they have and they didn't even realize. I thought by putting forward my opinion first, for example, that I'm saying, I'm engaged, I'm ready, let's do this, as opposed to shutting somebody else off. Of course, too, if you're in a position of power as a boss, you feel more free to say what you want to say, and you pull forward an opinion, and you then say, what do you think? Just that little exchange, not realizing the effect that you stating your opinion first in that power dynamic has on the other person. So do you have to believe in empathy wholesale? Go be that monk, be that? No, you just have to figure out little tips and tricks and notice the rewards. That's the key. Notice the rewards that come with doing some of these small things. And those rewards motivate you to keep doing more and more.
Yeah, I think in some ways you're lowering the barrier to entry basically.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's a gateway drug.
I love the analogies that you're bringing. It's a gateway drug.
But yeah, no, I really am. I don't want to say low bar, but I am for empathy for the masses. And
which I think is super important, because I think one of the things that are happening, what you alluded to, is most of the articles emphasize listening and conversations and difficult conversations, might we say. And these are naturally provoking other people, a little bit of hesitation, a little bit of tenseness. Or do I really want to go there? Or am I ready? That now it becomes a whole work that you have to spend maybe days, months, weeks to even prepare. Maybe you may never do it. Whereas what you're saying is, you don't have to start there. Start here. These are very tangible, a quick way to get started on this. And once you try it, see what happens. And once you reap the reward, as you were saying, you may be more motivated and you may feel more relieved to try something a little bit more difficult.
yeah,
and step by step, you take it a gradual sort of progress towards what you're comfortable with and the way you're developing.
Yeah.
So what has it been like after you've had that experience and written the book? What are some places where you still find a little bit of difficulty with it?
I'm hot-headed. I am so much less so since doing this work, much less so. And
but I understand hot-headedness a little bit more.
I get angry easily.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. I'm not like a walking tyrant or anything.
It's okay to be angry.
But yes, it's okay to be angry. But for people who get angry a lot, we need to not get that.
Get too frequently
it's
angry.
Okay for people that don't get angry to get angry. Come on, guys. You can get angry. Come on.
Like too much repressed
not the message
anger.
We need. Yeah.
Too many times angry.
Yeah. It's the same with vulnerability. You could tell some people vulnerability is good. Not the person that's crying in their office
all the time.
every day. Like, that's not what they need to hear. I really believe in any of this kind of work, reaching people for who they are and where they are. Anyway, so for me, my goal is to be less hot-headed. And anger, of course, can be addictive because it can motivate you to act. And so you may feel that the absence of anger enervates you, it weakens you, but it can make you just more strategic. And so that's still my struggle, I think, is the hot-headedness. My research that I did on families with political differences, I did that starting 3 years ago, interviewed family members that voted for Trump and that voted for Clinton, and how are they managing together? And that gave me a lot of insight. So that's the difference that I can handle so far. I'm not like, as a person on the left, a lot of people like want to vomit when they hear right views or something. And that doesn't happen to me.
How do you navigate that for you personally?
Being a resident in coastal cities, I'm pretty ignorant of a lot of culture in the United States. But I did go to undergrad in Indiana. And I go back there as part of my alumni council work. But that's my only glimpse, but it's a pretty eye-opening glimpse. And I can hear and I believe when they say they've been left out of a lot of conversations. I really believe them. And it sounds so incredulous to say that when you're talking with white people, white men, when you just look at the composition of government or the top Forbes 500 list. But you also have to imagine that gap up there, despite the racial proximity, feels just so far away. I guess I'm talking more about ways that I feel more empathetic, even though you asked what challenges do I still have. When I am angry, I now see it as a time to notice and investigate what's going on. Not a time to say, I'm so right, you know. Doesn't mean I'm not right, but to take that pause and investigate it. I mean, this is maturity too, whether or not you've written a book or whatever.
There's several sort of themes throughout our conversation today, but it's an opportunity for humility. And once again, I think we established earlier on that humility is not something to be humiliated about. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean that you'll be taken advantage of. All you're really doing is you're actually going on a limb and saying, maybe there's something I don't know. What are the chances of that? Like, how's it going to hurt me if I just, for a moment, I can come back to my less humble self in about 30 minutes. I'll just, for about half an hour. Maybe I don't know something. Let's hold here for a second. Yeah. I might learn something new. And then if you actually do, then you're like, oh, I did learn something new. Oh, this is actually valuable for me. It's not something that I didn't think about in the past. I'm going to do this maybe a little bit more often, not every time, one time more than I used to, which used to be 0. But even then, I think in some ways that can actually make a humongous difference. I think you're modeling that in some ways.
I'll say too, I think for people who have trouble being interested in someone else and their perspective should practice with strangers. Because there's very low threat. So there can be a threat if somebody's perspective affects your own sense of self. That's why it's hard to get feedback. That's why it's hard to hear about white privilege or male privilege. That's why I think for leftists, it can be hard to hear that people in the heartland and the working in the convenience stores feel left out of the conversation. I think that the stakes can feel too high for us to do it. But if you practice with a stranger, used to be Lyft, great opportunity to do that.
Is that how you did it?
Oh,
my
conversations.
God. That's fantastic.
I have the most meaningful encounters with strangers all the time, pre-COVID. Hugs in the grocery aisle, tears about loss of it's constant. And it's not this kind of exhausting, I'm there for other people, I'm not giving to myself exchange. It's really an energizing understanding, connection over the human condition. And I appreciate it so much. And so I think though, for people who would like either startle everybody in their life if they started asking questions and taking an interest, or just afraid of what they might hear, to practice with strangers and remember, hey, I don't have to see threat in this. I can take this as just a total point of interest and practice.
Yeah. And it sounded like Lyft used to be a prime spot for that.
Yeah, or somebody in the aisle looking through, the amount of ice cream choices there are now keeps us there 10 minutes trying to decide. You could be right next to somebody for 10 minutes and you just ask them something like, what's your favorite flavor? Yeah. Oh, really? Funny. Mine is this. Or somebody says they're vegan. Oh, that's curious. How did that happen? You think you're being creepy, and maybe will think you are, but most will appreciate the conversation. And it's a great way to practice because there's no stakes.
Isn't that true? In times of COVID, in some ways, I think we all crave a little bit more of that human touch.
Oh, yes. The serendipitous conversations are gone right now for the most part.
Yeah. 6 feet apart, please.
Yeah. With the mask, someone celebrated their birthday outdoors, and I was meeting a lot of people for the first time, and I had no energy for it because I couldn't, hear them very well. So it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, it very much so is. Wow, fantastic. What's next for you?
Oh, what a good question. Well, right now, I'm really excited because I'm developing these courses online, and I'm really into good experiences. I take it very seriously, and I'm working very hard to make it good. And I just like that challenge because online learning can be so not good, especially for this topic. And also have been working with collaborators to expand the repertoire and go deeper. And so I have these 4 courses, the first being Empathy in Times of Suffering, which I think is about human to human. We all have our forms of grief, and how do we all accept that? But then the next course is the Empathy in Times of Conflict, when the last thing I want is to empathize with you. I want your empathy, please.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Right? So what's going on there? And both of these address social marginalization and exclusion, but it is not at the forefront of it. It's more situated within a larger human context. So my hope and what I've seen is that means that it's something for everybody versus a training directed like at white people, what you do wrong. And, I mean, that really, the Bay Area is so diverse that training doesn't really meet many people. And
let me ask you to come to a workshop and hear how horrible of a person you are. Let's do that for half a day.
Who wants to do that?
That's my Saturday afternoon.
It's offensive. Yes.
Fix it.
But there's a place for that clarity and for that indignation, for just in the messaging out there somewhere for somebody to pay attention. But then it's people like us who want to then be a gateway. Anyway, and then communication. Well, first of all, communication is about responsibility and humility. So some of us don't communicate, and we could conflate that with humility or just listening and interest. But there is a responsibility when we communicate too. And so helping people own up to that and feel good about that. And then the humility side. And also then with all of that, being really fair to ourselves about when we decide to communicate. Not every problem requires our effort. And some of our problems require more effort than we've given in the past. Some means less, but giving people a sense of choice around communication is really important to me. And that weaves in self-compassion and then empathy and insight. And so looking at attachment theory and how that can be conflated with these Buddhist empathy types that I love to help us see what is our filter typically and how can we detach from it a little bit and practice in what we email and how we conduct meetings to take ourselves out of that bit. So I'm trying to put this all online. Very difficult, but very exciting. And we'll see what happens.
Wow.
That's me. And probably a second book. So,
are you also actively working on a second book?
Yes. Yeah. But I'll say more when there's more.
Got it. Not more to say about right now.
I'm not being two-faced.
Of course not. There's just a lot of ambiguity you still have to weed through. Just being humble. And I understand that.
God, we would be so annoying to hang out with if we were like this all the time.
Oh my gosh. But thank you so much. What emotions do you feel as we end today's interview?
Well, again, so few interactions with strangers. And so having this highly rich opportunity with you, feeling a little conspicuous for others to see it, but I so value your style and your
thank you.
Work that you're trying to do, your story. We didn't address it, but people can go to your website and see the story that got you into this work, very similar to my story. And I just really feel grateful.
Thank you. Thank you. Once again, thank you so much for your willingness to come on this show and talk about an ambiguous and complicated topic such as empathy. We wish you well, and we will see each other hopefully online and maybe in person at some point too.
Yeah, I hope so. That would be fantastic. I would love it.
Thank you very much, Kelsey, for your time. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Hey there, listener. Thank you for listening to the very end. I believe we can mature and innovate by navigating the difficult journey of realizing empathy in the face of tension. What I've learned from my own experience is that all of our challenges in empathizing with others is ultimately an opportunity to realize empathy with ourselves, to develop a greater understanding and appreciation of who we are and who we can be when we feel connected. And this journey is difficult. Let's not sugarcoat it. This is especially so if you go at it alone. So I envision a world where each and every one of us, from the moment we're born until the day we die, can feel certain there's at least one person we can reach out to at any given moment who can and will support us in this journey in a way that actually makes us feel supported. If you share this belief, please subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels, and also like and share this episode, as well as leave a review of our podcast so more people can enjoy it. And if you believe you know somebody who can be a great guest for our show, please send us email at podcast@realizingempathy.com. We absolutely love hearing from you. Thank you once again, and until next time, may you stay beautiful.